I mean, listen, we talking about practice, not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice, not the game that I go out there and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game. We talking about practice, man. I mean, how silly is that, man? We're talking about practice. I know it's important. I do. I honestly do. But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice?
Hey, welcome back to Tabletop Tune Up, Ben. Hey, we're talking about practice.
I think that came through in the opening there.
Yeah. Hey, are you much of an NBA fan back in the day?
I think most of the games I've watched, I either watched with my dad or with you. It's not something I tend to pick up a lot on my spare time.
Yeah. You know me, Ben. I was just a huge NBA kid back in the 90s. I loved the 80s and 90s basketball. And Allen Iverson's one of my all-time favorites. Nobody worked harder than him on the court. People might have worked harder than him off the court, but nobody hustled more than him. Most minutes played, most minutes hustled. What a legend.
He goes out there and dies for that game, Mark.
That's right. You know what? And practice, we're going to be talking about practice because practice is what makes our games better. Because we're not all gifted with those natural talent and gifts. If Allen Iverson, if he was a GM, he wouldn't need all this practice, but we do. We're mortals.
That's right. Yeah. Now, practice is another way of talking about planning or prep. There's a couple senses, though, practice, right? And we're going to talk about that planning or prep.
Yeah, I guess, in a basketball game, practice is preparation. And maybe preparation is a better word for what we're doing for our game. Yeah, we're talking about preparation.
There's a different sense of practice in which you just play a lot of games. And I mean, the longer you GM, the longer you play these games, the more experiences you're going to have that you're going to learn from, and you're going to become a better GM that way. But in terms of preparation and planning for gameplay, that's our topic for today. Talk to me about why this is an important thing, Mark.
Well, practice or preparation, as we're calling here, it just makes everything so much easier. You're trying to lighten your workload. As you get better, you need less of it because you know kind of where to practice, where to prep. These things allow you to kind of go off the script. I don't know. If I'm not prepared, either mentally or on paper, I can't go off script. I mean, I could, but I'll get lost and the campaign might get lost.
So preparation actually helps you with improvisation. It helps you with managing things in the moment. It helps you when your players throw curveballs at you and you're not sure what to do. But you know what? If you have done your prep, well, you know what's around the next corner, or you know what's over in the next town if they decide to leave.
Mm-hmm. Or if you've even thought about it or visualized it, you can kind of go a little off script for a while. So these things are all kind of important. So let's talk about preparation. Ben, how do you prepare?
You and I have talked a lot about how we're a little bit eclectic. Our interview guest last episode, Tad Leckman, plays a lot of different games too. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things I'll do is got to make sure I've learned the rules. And if I haven't got all the rules down, that's okay. But you do have to kind of let your players know they're in for a little bit of a rough ride. Mm-hmm. So I think the really important thing is to get to know those rules as best you can. If the table has a rules lawyer at it, that's okay. Collaborate with them maybe ahead of time. And then as you're going through the game, you can turn that rules lawyer into your rules lawyer, your advocate.
I love rules lawyers at the games, Ben. I'll be honest, because I'm not the best sometimes at the rules. So I always like it when I have somebody there that could kind of like keep me on the straight and narrow.
Excellent. Now, Mark, tell me about preparing when it comes to story.
So when I'm thinking about preparation and I'm thinking about story, I'm trying to think really about where I'm going to begin, what's going to be the meat of that session, and how it's going to end. So I'm kind of thinking of them as like just that session, and I want to have a good exciting beginning or intriguing beginning, but I really want to stick a landing by the end of that session. So I'm thinking about that when I'm preparing.
There's a little bit of a cliffhanger maybe at the end. There's revelations to unfold. That kind of, I won't say it's quite as tight as a 3-act structure, but clearly there's things you want your players to have to solve and work on during the session.
Correct. Yeah.
To do that though, right, you've got to have, this is collaborative storytelling. You're not writing a book, as we've said. So how do you get a feel for what the players are going to do? Tell me about how that process goes.
First of all, you got to know your players. I mean, when it comes down to it, but you don't always have that luxury. So if you don't know the players, know their characters. Trust that they're going to play those characters in a way that you might expect. But let's assume you know those players. You've been friends with these people. You know what they like. You kind of know a little bit of their capabilities and their play styles. You kind of have a sense of what they may or may not do during the session. It's not always a guarantee, Ben. I'm running a game right now, and I really kind of was leaning on the thought that players might have some curiosity about a few things that they had no curiosity in. And
sometimes they look at that thing you laid out there for them and they're like, nope, they move on.
And I'll be honest, I didn't handle it terribly well. I mean, I relied on that, and I just had this entire set piece predicated on the fact that they might have at some point been curious about something they clearly were not. And I had to adjust frustratingly on the fly. Not my proudest moment, but we got there. But the idea is that you can't rely so much on that. You have to make your best guesses and go with the flow and fake it till you make it.
One of the things to make sure you end with, you were talking earlier about knowing where you want to land at the end of a session and how you're going to end things up, is there's got to be something here where you kind of say, okay, well, my players could make any choice, but I think they're going to want to go in these ways. I think they're going to want to enter that castle, or I think they're going to want to, retreat and find a place of safety to recuperate after that, big fight. Maybe they're going to go research, right? But you'll want to try to forecast a little bit about what they're going to do and what kinds of things are out there for them. Some of the way that you do that is just by managing what information they have access to. One of the things I'll do a lot is players at a metagame level know that they're here to follow the threads that you're laying down. But if you are very careful about what threads you're laying down, there's only so many ways they could go. And so that gives you a little bit of a way to focus on certain directions.
Kind of in layman's terms, Ben is setting up what's going to transpire in the next session. He's basically asking the players by the end of that session, hey, what's your plan? Where are you going? Maybe he's asking overtly. Maybe he's just forecasting by the direction they're telling him where they're going to go. This allows Ben to kind of plot and plan with efficiency.
One trick I'll use for this is at the end of the session, maybe you've been in a classroom before where a teacher will kind of recap the lecture at the end of the lecture and say, well, today we covered this and that and the next thing. We talk about session recaps at the beginning of a session, but you can also do it kind of at the end to recap what people have found and to help them understand where they might expect to go next time, just like it was a cliffhanger in a show.
Yeah.
All right, friends. Well, you've clearly beaten this monster and you have learned the secret lore of such and such. What mysteries await in the town of so-and-so down the way? And then all of a sudden you've just placed that seed in their head that town is where they're going to probably get answers to whatever questions you laid down in this encounter.
Let me just jump to another thing that we might prepare as we're running these games. We're going to be stepping back and taking a look at what's working and what's not working. We want to really have our fingers on the pulse of kind of what's happening. This requires you to have your head up, your ears open, you're listening, you're picking up the audio cues from people. Knowing what is working successfully and not helps you economize your time when you're preparing for that next session.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that's so important, we've talked about listening, but it's not something you just do at the beginning. It's not something you just do in one session. I've had games where I was playing long-term with people over several dozens of sessions even. And in one case, I tried hey, everybody, let's do kind of a war game style battle in this town, right? And I kind of telescoped out of the players' views, and I had them all kind of managing whole units of people. It was like almost like taking a war game approach to a D&D game, let's say. They didn't really dig it. We had to actually kind of adjust as we played, and that was actually a little tough in some ways, but it was more important that we made the adjustment than that I kind of tried to force people through until I had time to think about it, how to do it a different way later.
That's good that you made that adjustment. You were cued in, you were listening, you were seeing what was happening, and you had the kind of wherewithal to make that adjustment. And how'd it go once you did make those changes?
Better. I mean, the thing is that you can recover goodwill if you show that you're willing to make those changes and be responsive to your players. We've talked about how when you listen and when you react to what your players are doing, then your players will learn that their voice counts. And so when I started making those changes and adjustments, they saw that I was making that shift, and then they stayed engaged.
Yeah. So you actually turned that into what was a negative. You kind of turned it into a positive by showing your willingness to listen, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. Listening, continuous listening especially, is important. And then Mark used this term visualization a lot. So when you're thinking about what's working or what's not, or what kind of direction you're going to go, tell me a bit about what visualization is like as an ongoing process during the game.
Visualization is something I probably picked up pretty early when I was playing sports and stuff. You kind of visualize your success, so to speak. You always have to practice, like, hey, when I'm wrestling, if this person's doing this move, I'm going to do this. So you're in your mind, you're kind of imagining it's like a chess game. You're going to be moving these around. It's not that different though when you're at a table and you're imagining all the different routes players can go, places they might want to investigate or see or do, and just spending a little time with your imagination. I mean, this is a game of imagination, right, Ben?
Sure is.
Yeah, you spend a little time with your imagination, visualizing different paths they're going to travel. And just even doing that, the simple act of imagining that helps you be prepared for it.
We're talking about the value of preparation, but of course you can over-prepare.
Oh, yeah.
What does over-preparation look like? Mark, have you ever over-prepared for something?
Yeah. So many times, man. Ben, I swear, I kid you not, I have worked up entire dungeons, like massive layers, and I just threw them away because I had prepared so early in the game that I thought, like, I wrote out this campaign, and I realized, like, midway through that, like, I am never going to get to this spot. And by the time we did get to that spot, I was like, they are not on board with this. Like, there's no way they're going to do this. So don't plan so far out that you don't know what the game's going to be like by the time you get there.
The further out you plan, the more loosely you want to hold to that plan.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the value of sort of starting small and sketching in high-level pieces. And so I think the idea would be like, if we're talking about what you're doing this session, plan well. If you're talking about what you're going to do next session, have a plan, have some places to go, have some things that you think are connecting to this session, but maybe a little bit loosely held in case the players decide to do something else. And if you're talking about like sessions plural from now, that's when you want to be quite a bit looser and have maybe some bullet points, maybe some ideas for a set piece, action piece, something like that. But you don't want to, as you're saying, kind of draw out whole maps and create really detailed stories and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that is the truth. I mean, you can get way too far in the weeds and that kind of stuff. Honestly, plan for the short term. You can have long-term ideas, but with visualization, you might want to have several long-term ideas. And then as you get closer, you might pick the one that you think is best, or might come up with a new one.
Yeah.
I'm pretty notorious about blowing up my plans the night before a game session and starting from scratch because I've come up with something better. So
it's funny how inspiration strikes, isn't it?
It does. And sometimes it ruins your afternoon.
Well, yeah. Here's something else, though, that's important, guys, is even if you're going to do that, even if your players decide they're going to turn left and go down the road you haven't planned for, instead of turning right and going down that road into the dungeon you'd meticulously crafted, don't throw those dungeons away. Don't throw those notes away. Don't throw any of that stuff away because you will reuse it someday in the future. When you need a dungeon to pull out of your back pocket, it's going to be there.
You might just find like another group is just ready for that. Like they're like, this is the dungeon for this group. I'm going to break it out, repurpose it. That work can be put to good use.
Well, and this is actually a good note too, because preparation can help you in a lot of ways when it comes to improvisation. Obviously, the more you've prepared the world, or the more you've prepared what you know about NPCs and bad guys and locations, obviously that helps you if the players turn some way or another that you didn't expect, then you've got information. But even more to the point, having a whole backlog of stuff that maybe you've used or thrown away or only partly used or whatever, you can pull that stuff out and use it improvisationally when your players go somewhere you didn't expect them to go. And all of a sudden now you need a dungeon, or now you need an NPC or something like that.
Or maybe there should be some sort of charity where you could donate your dungeons for poor children who've never had good dungeons before.
That's right. Well, it is the season of giving, Mark.
That's true. We're kind of getting there. So yeah, we've talked a lot about preparation and visualization and how they can make your prep better. And we've kind of talked about the importance of prep. But all these things, all this prep, really, when we come down to it, it just makes you stronger, makes your games better, and allows you to kind of be able to wing it a lot easier when you want to go off script, because you've kind of gone through the motions behind the scenes. You can do all that. So don't give up on prep, and don't shortchange your game by doing no prep.
I think the entire act of running a game as a GM is a very face-to-face act. It's not something where we've got our noses in books reading out box text and mechanically doing everything, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm running a game with you in it, I'm watching what you're doing, and it's when you're unsure about what's behind that door that I'm going to then maybe ask you to roll on something, or it's all kinds of ways in which I'm not playing the game, I'm playing you, the player, and the medium through which I'm doing that is the game. The more you've prepared, the more rich that medium is, the more you can draw on it and interact with your players in great, new, interesting ways.
And experience really comes into this a lot. As you GM more, you just prep a lot less. You might do some in the beginning, but I find sessions where I don't have to do any prep because I've done it maybe earlier. I kind of know where things are going. This is where the experience kind of kicks in, guys. And you're going to find yourself more efficient and just frankly better.
Yeah, I'll say this. I tend to do the most amount of prep. I probably do 2/3, 3/4 the amount of prep I'm going to do for a whole adventure sequence around the time of the first 2 or 3 sessions. And then what'll happen is the rest of the time I'm just making adjustments.
Yeah.
Most of the prep is happening at or before even that first session in a sequence I'm running. And then after that, it's just, hey, let's see what unwinds. Okay, they did this. So now maybe I need to throw in a couple extra monsters there, or I need to put another mystery here, or hey, they didn't pick up that clue. So guess what? I'm going to have to find another way to bring that in. But you're not having to write everything from scratch once you get things up and running.
And we talked a little bit about learning the rules, but this is kind of, learning the system as well is going to be important for preparation. I will say this, one of the things, if there's a game that I can run well, I know the rules really well, I know the system and the lore, it just makes everything a lot easier. If I'm jumping into a game maybe I'm playing some sort of mystery game that I don't really know much about this realm or this place, that's going to be a lot more prep. And I'm a little intimidated by that sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good note. One of the things about preparation is that preparation is a way of both playing to your strengths and shoring up your weaknesses. You're going to have a great time with whatever the strong parts are that you work on. And Mark, you do a great job prepping things with respect to art and description and just really creative, interesting ideas. And then I know that you spend a lot of time making sure that you've got the parts where you feel weaker kind of shored up because you spent the homework time ahead of time, making sure that was ready to go.
And folks, if you got ideas for prep, anything like that, we'd like to hear them. So send it to us at tabletoptuneup@gmail.com or comment on the YouTube channel, and we'll be happy to respond.
Well, as always, Mark, it is time for our tune-up segment. Here's our tune-up for this week. We have someone who wrote to us and said, coming from D&D, I have a clear sense of how to set encounter challenges for a party of 4 to 5. But now I'm running a game in a different system and my party is only 3 players. There's not a lot of guidance in the system about how to calibrate the challenge of the encounter. So what should I do?
Man, I'll tell you a pretty simple idea. And I do this even for games I'm experienced in, because sometimes you don't know if players are just going to walk through encounters pretty easily, pretty handedly.
Mhm.
There's always a few more goblins with some torches behind door number 2. In round 2 or 3, hey, they just might come in and throw some fire.
Yeah. Now, is this your way of being able to amp up an encounter? And the idea is that you're going to kind of err on the side of it being a weaker encounter?
Yeah, I think I'd err on the side of, particularly if I don't know the system terribly well, I'm going to err on the side of a weaker encounter. Maybe the players don't know the system and they're trying to figure things out. If I have the next wave of the encounter ready to go, if I realize, they're struggling here.
Yeah.
That wave 2 doesn't have to happen.
I like your point about having stuff kind of waiting in the wings or having little contingencies. One of the things that I'll do as well is not just doing that with like monsters that might be around the corner or that could be alerted, but also with environmental challenges.
Yeah, complications.
Right. Maybe the players are coming into some place and there was going to be difficult terrain in some spot, or there was going to be some kind of environmental hazard that was going to give them a negative modifiers to their rolls or something like that. Oh, man,
that's a great idea, Ben, because there's nothing I like more than having an encounter and having a third element into an encounter.
Yeah.
Like something that in the environment is also causing problems.
The cool part about that is that if you know the players have been struggling, you don't have to add that in and they won't know it was there and miss it.
Yeah.
If the players have been walking through everything, you can add that in pretty much on the fly and it's going to become important and they're going to have to work around that.
Do you know one thing I think of when I think of your suggestion about adding in an environmental problem? All I can think of is Steven Spielberg. He is so good in his movies about always throwing in that third problem. I mean, it's not enough that Indiana Jones is fighting a guy by a plane. Now we have to worry about a propeller spinning around that could cause a problem.
You could do so many things. It's the propeller that's spinning around that's a problem. It's the fire that's tracing its way back to the gas container. It's the lady that's locked in the front of the plane and she can't get out and you've got to go figure that out.
Yeah.
There's so many dimensions you can do. So that would be kind of my general sense of encounter challenge is look for environmental stuff, look for stuff where it's easy to add or remove monsters, to your point, Mark. One other thing I'll do too is in a system where you're not really sure, or actually even in the first combat or two with players you haven't played with before, start with maybe just one enemy per player character. Intrinsically there, you're balancing the action economy. You're balancing the terms of the engagement. And then just make sure that your villains don't have much stronger, abilities than your heroes do, which typically they won't. And then what that lets you do is you can kind of see how they do and give them a little bit of a light run, a light exercise before they start getting into heavier and heavier stuff. And the cool part is the direction of challenge then is up and up and up and up from there. So start small, as we say with everything else, start slowly and then scale as you go.
That's some great advice, Ben. And I think that kind of sums up our tabletop tune-up, you guys. And I think that ends our show a little early.
A little early. I'm looking forward to hearing how this one comes out. I'd love to hear what people do to balance their own encounters and love to hear what they do for practice. So you guys, this week, a little bit shorter episode, but we'll be back next week. Until then, keep those dice rolling.
Well, get your tune up. It's time for your tune up. Your game needs a tune up. Get your tune up. It's time for your tune up. Your game needs a tune up.